Oh, I don't feel like I've made that a secret. It's clear that I want to bag these monkeys.
Welcome to a very special episode of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast. We're a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses nerddom through various segments. You can find us at thenerdspodcast.com, and you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter through our handle at thenerdspodcast. If you'd like to reach us directly, including sending us suggestions for our nerd favorite segment, you can email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. Additionally, we have a YouTube page under the Nerds You're Looking For banner, and each of us have a Letterboxd account, which is basically social media for watching movies. I'm at that Tyler Hunt, and my co-host Pat can be found at the Nerds Podcast. With all of that being said, and without further ado, alongside me, as always, is my co-host Pat Attack. How's it going, man?
I'm good. We kind of joked a little bit last episode that you weren't feeling very well. Well, I joked. You didn't seem like you were in a very joking mood about it, and turns out I got what I deserved. Karma came back, and I got sick like immediately after we recorded last week's episode. So I'm just now getting over it. So if you hear me like pop a cough drop or like cough in the background, I apologize for that. I'm going to try to keep that to a minimum because, like you said, it is a very special episode. We are joined, as we always are, for our top 10 favorite movies of the year episode by our friend from the Obsessive Viewer, Matt Hurt. How's it going, Matt?
It's going great. Thanks for having me once again on this episode. I love that this is just a tradition. It's so much fun coming on and talking to you guys.
For sure. And I don't know if you noticed, Matt, I don't know how much time you have to keep up with our podcast. I try to keep up with yours, just throwing that out there. But we don't have very many guests on here very often. Like we have you on for this episode, and we usually have a guest on for any PopCon episode, and that's it. So you should feel special.
I do, and I did notice that, and I do feel very special. And I know that on the PopCon episode, you had Tony Troxel from Geeking in Indiana, who he's been on the Obsessive Viewer several times. He's a super good dude. I still have one of his recorders, actually. That I
like
use
one of those
Heartland.
flutes?
No.
Recorder, nice.
God. Yeah, I'm perfecting my hot cross buns.
I was always really good at Three Blind Mice on the recorder.
Yes. Which is essentially the same thing.
Yeah, it's literally the same song.
I never fucking noticed that. Until just now.
Childhood ruined. But yeah,
So,
I do
Tony,
feel honored to be here. And Tony's a good dude, and that was a good episode and everything that you guys had with him. So, yep.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And we talked about it on that particular episode. I kind of monopolized the conversation between the two of us, Tyler and I, and that was the longest I had gone on the podcast without talking, because they just literally just Disney World all over that episode.
Yep.
It was awesome.
That's awesome.
Oh, yeah, it was a good time. I just got to sit back and relax for a little bit. But yeah, this is a special episode. We're doing our top 10 favorite movies of 2018, as we always do around this time of the year. And as we always do with this episode, if this is your first episode, what we're going to do is normally we go through all of our segments, what we're into, comics, nerd news, our main topic, and then nerd favorite. But on this episode, because there's three of us and we all have honorable mentions, a top 10, and then we do a couple of our least favorite movies of the year, we're just going to do that. We're not going to go through our regular segments. And we're also going to do it by favorite, and we make the distinction between favorite and best. Obviously, we don't have any training in as far as filmmaking is concerned. So it's not like we can say like technical aspects, like this movie was shot this way, that way, it made it better than this other movie. Plus, we don't watch every single movie as much as we try to. We just can't get around to every single one. So we're just talking about the movies that we enjoyed the most in 2018. So since you're our guest, and I know that you have probably several honorable mentions, Matt, we're going to start off with you. What are your honorable mentions for 2018?
Okay, I have 5 honorable mentions, and I'll run through them quickly. First one is Annihilation, Alex Garland's sci-fi movie with Natalie Portman and a bunch of people. It was good. It was not good enough for the top 10 for me, just because I was a huge fan of Ex Machina, which came out a few years ago, and I just like Ex Machina stayed with me a lot more than Annihilation did. But I thought Annihilation was cool, just not top 10 worthy. Next honorable mention is Black Klansman, which I thought was really, really good at depicting in a true story and a true case that happened, and kind of getting connecting it well to the modern era that we are. The kind of ending sequence of that movie just really stuck with me. Next honorable mention is Sorry to Bother You, which I thought was just really out there and just crazy and awesome. And again, it had a lot of good like social commentary and stuff that I thought was really important. But ultimately, I saw 10 better movies. Then the next one is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which I feel like when I rewatch it, I'll probably regret not putting it in my top 10, just because it is so fresh and interesting and fun, and it was a blast. And then finally, my last honorable mention is Upgrade, which I thought was really fun. The way that they shot the action and just kind of stabilized on Logan Marshall Green when he's taken over by the implant was really cool. Like, I hadn't seen anything like that before. So those are my honorable mentions. And yeah.
So Tyler and I reviewed Annihilation, and neither one of us really liked it that much. And I actually, you mentioned that Ex Machina stayed with you more than Annihilation. Mm-hmm. I literally forgot Annihilation even existed until you just said that. Like, when you said the title, I was like, what? Like, that sounds familiar. And then I was like, oh yeah, that's the Natalie Portman movie that neither one of us liked.
Yeah.
I would assume it's probably not appropriate to heckle our guest. So I was going to let it go.
No, I didn't let it go. Speaking of not letting it go, I think you pronounce Black Klansman wrong. I think it's Black Klansman.
Right.
That was a stupid joke, and I apologize for that.
My bad.
So, Tyler, do you have any honorable mentions?
Yeah, I do. So what I did this year was I have a list on Letterboxd where I ranked every single movie I saw that was released in 2018, and I will say Annihilation made my top 46. So
nice.
So, I didn't hate it. But anyways, so I'll do 5 honorable mentions since that's what Matt did. First honorable mention was Ready Player One. I think that I liked this movie more than most if you go back and listen to our review. The book's definitely better, and I do feel a little pretentious being somebody that says something like that. But I think that the movie still is like a love letter to pop culture and science fiction, and it's a beautifully made movie. Obviously, Steven Spielberg directing, so that movie will hold a place in my heart for the years to come. Next honorable mention was Black Klansman, and I'm not going to feed into your joke and say it a different way.
That's probably good. One time for that joke is enough.
You can go back and listen to us talking about it on the podcast from that episode last year, but thought that it was a very well-made movie, and obviously it's more, I don't know if you'd say it period piece, because it takes place in the past, but I think that a lot of the messages in that movie are important today as well, and I think that it was well acted. Adam Driver's amazing in it. The actor who plays the main guy, oh my god, I can't remember his name.
John David Washington.
Okay, yeah, John David Washington's great, and then of course, Spike Lee's kind of hit or miss for me, but I thought that it was really well done. Next honorable mention is Mission Impossible Fallout. I liked that movie a lot more than I thought I would, and maybe it's just because of what it did for my Rotten Tomatoes film draft that I'm hanging on to it. But the use of practical effects and that the way they're able to keep upping the ante every time they make one of these movies. Like, there's no reason this series should be as good as it is, but they're 7 movies in at this point, and
6
still crank.
Yeah,
is that 6? Okay, 6 movies in, and they're still cranking out great stories. So definitely like Mission Impossible Fallout. Next one is Deadpool 2. So I was pretty lukewarm when we reviewed this initially, but I've watched it twice since, and I keep picking up on jokes that I missed the first 2 times I watched it. So I definitely have grown to appreciate the comedy in this movie a lot more than I did initially, and I think that it was really well written and then just really well acted by all involved. And then last honorable mention is A Star Is Born. So, I mean, we talked about this twice on the podcast. I had no idea what this movie was when I was seeing it. I've never seen any of the other Stars Is Born movies. So, it just completely caught me off guard. I thought that it was very well acted. I thought the music was great. I have a few gripes here and there, but at the end of the day, that movie impacted me when I was watching it, again, because I had no idea what was coming. So I felt like it deserved an honorable mention slot.
For sure. And
nice.
I was actually talking with one of my friends. Matt, you might actually know him. Mike? Do you know Mike?
Oh, yes. Michael,
Okay.
Mr. White.
Yeah, at I am Mike White on Twitter. But he mentioned something that didn't really stick out to me when I first started watching, or when I first watched A Star Is Born, but it's a really good point in the fact that they made Bradley Cooper's character too right in that movie. Like, so basically in that, like, the third act, which I didn't particularly like the third act of that movie,
Yeah.
they essentially make her into a pop star, and that's not what he liked about her when they first got together. And her music is fucking awful when she was the pop star. And Mike made the point that they made Bradley Cooper's character too right. Like, you agree with him too much in that movie. And I thought that was a really good point, and something that I didn't pick up on when I first saw that movie. It was just too long for me. Like, they just dragged everything out in that movie, and I just really, really couldn't get into the third act of that movie.
Yeah, I totally get that too. It didn't. Spoiler, but it didn't make my top 10. But I still enjoyed it, for the most part.
All right, so I only have 3 honorable mentions that I wanted to bring up, and the first one, in no particular order, is Giant, which is the Andre the Giant HBO exclusive documentary, which I think I've brought this up on the podcast before, but I actually went to visit Tyler in Cleveland, and we sat down and watched this together, and I was really blown away by how interesting they made this movie, because I am not a fan of wrestling at all. Not, like, in the single bit. Like, I went and saw a WrestleMania in Louisville when I was in, like, junior high, and that was, like, the height of my wrestling fandom. I played WWF Warzone and WrestleMania on the N64, and literally my only wrestling knowledge is from those 2 video games. So I am not a wrestling fan at all. But just the way that that documentary broke down just the way that he was as a person, and the way that he dealt with his deformity, and just how he was such a huge man, and how he dealt with traveling at that size, and just dealing with other people being regular size and him not being that size. I just thought it was really, really interesting. They dived into more of him as a person, which was the most interesting part of the documentary for me. But it was also kind of interesting to see how his development in the wrestling world also developed the wrestling world as a sport and as entertainment in general, because it was like these little just like regional segments, and when he came on the scene, he kind of combined those segments and brought it to national attention, and I thought that was really interesting. So I wanted to bring that movie up, and I was pretty sure, like, when we watched it in Cleveland, that it was definitely going to make my top 10, but then, of course, throughout the year, I saw movies that I enjoyed a little bit more, and I haven't felt the need to go back and rewatch Giant, so that was kind of another reason why I didn't want to put it on my top 10. The next one is another movie that when I saw it, I was pretty sure was going to make my top 10, and that is A Quiet Place. I just love horror movies that build tension and build characters, and that's what this movie does. Like, sure, it's a little gimmicky, and I know that Tyler didn't particularly like it as much as I did because he thought it was too gimmicky, but I really love the way that they, obviously sound plays such an important role in the horror movies that I enjoy, and this movie took that to a whole new extreme, and you felt the terror when they made a sound in this movie. So I really appreciated that. I've seen it once since I saw it in the theaters, and it definitely still holds up, but I didn't have that same sense of terror the second time I watched it. Maybe that's just because I was watching it at home versus watching it in the theater. So I decided to not put it on my top 10 because of that. And then the last honorable mention that I have is Ant-Man and the Wasp. I loved Ant-Man more than I think most people did as far as the whole scope of the MCU is concerned. And I really loved the inclusion of the Wasp in that mythology. I thought that she really was a huge badass in this movie, and I loved it because I think that was something that was, I mean, you get a little bit of that in Ant-Man, the first movie, but I really loved her in the second movie. Unfortunately, again, as I said about Giant and A Quiet Place, I just didn't find a slot for it in my top 10.
Cool. Nice.
All right, so we're going to change it up a little bit, and instead of just going through each of our lists individually, we're going to bounce back and forth. So we're going to talk about Matt, you're going to do your 10, and then Tyler's going to do his 10, and I'll do my 10. So what was your number 10 favorite movie of 2018?
Okay. So, first of all, I was really excited about this top 10 list just because I watched more movies in 2018 than I think I have really any year previous. So I had a lot of movies to choose from. So I was really excited about this top 10 list. So number 10 is Blockers with John Cena and Ike Barinholtz and Leslie Mann. But the reason why it's number 10 is because it harkens back to the type of movie that I loved when I was like a teenager, the teen sex comedy. Like I loved American Pie and all of those movies. And Blockers is like a modern teen sex comedy in that it takes place, like it's from the perspective of the parents. So that's also a big thing, that it's from the perspective of people like nearer to my age than the kids are. But it's also like a very sex positive and progressive type of movie. And it's hilarious. Like I've watched it probably 3 times at this point, and it's a blast. It's hilarious. And I really want to see Ike Barinholtz, Leslie Mann, and John Cena do more like comedy together because they were really great together in that movie.
Yeah, so my wife and I sat down to watch this movie. I didn't expect when I first saw the trailer that I was ever going to watch this movie, because mostly when I see that John Cena's in a movie and I'm immediately like, nope, not going to see that movie. And then it didn't look all that interesting or funny to me, and then it got some decent reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. So I was like, okay, well, once it came out, my wife and I sat down in our living room to watch it, and we got like 15 minutes into it. And I don't know if we just weren't in the right mindset to watch it
really?
or not, but we were just like, nah, this really isn't for us, and we never revisited it. So I've seen the first 15 minutes of this movie, but other than that, I never thought that we were going to talk about this movie.
Yeah,
that's fair.
I'm more with Matt on this one. So, it didn't make my top 10, but I thought that it was a lot better than what I was expecting. And similar to what Matt was saying, I do appreciate that it's very sex positive. I think that there's a really good message about, being, I feel weird saying this, being sexual in high school. And like what that comes with, and same as what you were saying, I didn't have high hopes for it because John Cena's John Cena, but I really like Ike Barinholtz and Leslie Mann, so I thought that they were a great ensemble.
What I love about like John Cena in the movie is that he's playing like against type, like he's playing this kind of dorky dad character, and it's like there's one part where they're trying to get information from another kid's parents, and Ike Barinholtz is like, "Oh, my buddy here is gonna just beat the shit out of you or something if you don't give us the information." And John Cena's like, "No, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna do that. Do you have the info? Like, can we get the information?" Like, he's very polite and everything. And I don't know. I dug it a lot.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of his character in Trainwreck. Like, I think when you have John Cena in a movie, as far as comedic-wise, I think he's best when he's kind of playing off what you assume that the type of character that he's going to be. And so I think that works best. I mean, I liked his character in Trainwreck, even though I wasn't a huge fan of that movie in general. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, I think that he's at his best comedic-wise when he's kind of playing off the assumptions of John Cena.
I agree. Yep.
Perfect. All right, Tyler, so what is your number 10?
So I think every year when we do this, there's always like a movie that falls into one of our top 10s, and it's something that we just saw. And, you know, maybe after further viewings, this won't be on my top 10, but it's just fresh in my mind. And I had to bite my tongue because you guys were kind of trashing this movie a little bit before we started recording Inside Baseball. But Vice. So I talked about this movie last week for what I was into. And the more that I've let it kind of simmer and the more I've thought about it, the more I really loved it. And I think what I love about this movie, looking back on it, was not only was it like well acted, well directed, in my opinion, but it's such a fucking metal movie. Like it's a finger to the entire, you know, presidency and you know, the Bush presidency and to Dick Cheney. And you guys were kind of talking about it again before we started recording, and I talked about it last week with my theater experience, but like it was almost completely what I assume, and maybe it's the bigot in me, but well, not bigot's not a right word. It was just there's a lot of old people at that movie, and I assume that all old people are conservative, so that's a bias I have. But I imagine that there are a lot of people going to see this movie because they want to see this biopic about our vice president from 2000 to 2008. And then they get this very liberal movie that's kind of a finger to all of that. So again, I like that aspect of it. It's super well acted. I think Christian Bale's performance in that movie is probably my favorite of the year. Amy Adams, I mentioned last week, I've never been a huge fan of her, but she's been great in the last few things she's done. So she's definitely turning me into a fan, this movie included. Steve Carell's amazing. Sam Rockwell's always amazing. So yeah, I mean, this movie's again fresh in my mind, but I really think that it might stay in my top 10. It was a cool movie to see at the end of the year.
Yeah, so my wife and I went and saw this movie. I talked about how we tried to see this movie when we were in Vegas last week, but we eventually did get to see it last night. And I don't know, man. I felt like I was looking at my watch a lot because we just talked about this, like Tyler said before we started recording, that I don't know. The way that they put this movie together, it felt like it was all over the place. And it felt like it was too cute for its own good. Like, I felt like they were trying to be too cute. And the worst example of that, and my wife is actually the one that brought it up when we were driving home, is when they're at the restaurant and they're like pretend ordering all of these things that happened during the war. And it was just, oh my God, I had to roll my eyes so hard during that scene. It was just so over the top, and it just, I don't know, like, I liked that kind of stuff in The Big Short. I just think I was a little bit more interested in the stuff in The Big Short than I was in this movie, which is surprising because I'm really not that into like the housing stuff. So I don't know. It felt more original in The Big Short, and I don't know. It just didn't ever work for me in Vice.
That's fair. I actually loved the restaurant scene because it felt like the kind of stuff they did in The Big Short. Like in The Big Short, they had a lot of cutaways to like Margot Robbie in a bathtub telling you about the housing crisis and everything, and like that stuff was fun. But like it feels like they didn't do that much in Vice. But when they did, like with the restaurant scene, it hit really hard for me. I liked it.
I felt like that was more of the heart transplant guy, though. The Margot Robbie character in The Big Short was kind of like his character in Vice. So they did kind of the same thing.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I mean, in terms of kind of dumbing everything down, like in The Big Short, they had like I think it was Margot Robbie in the bathtub to explain it as like a distraction, and like that is a clever device and everything. And it's kind of the same with Alfred Molina in Vice, because he's like just dumbing down what all it is, although he's not in a bathtub, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's not Margot Robbie either, so
yeah,
that certainly helped in The Big Short. But no, I really just couldn't get into this movie, even though I think that there is a movie there that I would really want to see. That, I mean, I'm interested in that kind of stuff, and obviously I don't think it's a shock to too many of our listeners that Tyler and I are both pretty liberal, so we definitely enjoy that type of movie and that big middle finger to the conservative group. But yeah, I think that if they had cut it together a little bit more, I don't want to say conventional, because I don't necessarily consider myself like you have to be conventional when it comes to filmmaking, but I just think that I wanted more information than I think we got than them trying to be cute. But I will agree that Christian Bale in this movie is fucking phenomenal. Every time that he did like the little mannerisms of Dick Cheney is just so fucking good. And they made him look just like him, which was crazy. Yeah. And then Sam Rockwell played the idiot George Bush so well. Like, he just, I love like when they had their meeting together and then Christian Bale comes back and he's brushing his teeth and he's like, he's so green. I was like, no, you want to say that he's a fucking idiot, because he seemed like a fucking idiot.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, all the stuff that you were railing on worked for me because it hit my number 10. I love the restaurant scene. I loved the part where they act like they're ending the movie early. Like, that stuff was great.
That did work for me. Actually, I laughed pretty hard on that one.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
But yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so my number 10 is a movie that if I had to guess, I'm pretty sure it's going to make at least one of your top 10 as well, and that is Hereditary. So I think it's fun that we are talking about this movie because we actually saw it, all three of us, for the first time on my birthday when we went up to Indy for Indy PopCon. And I still remember Matt literally jumping out of his chair when we got that first jump scare in the movie, which is funny because you see that jump scare in the trailer. So that didn't surprise me at all.
A little bit,
Speaking of the trailer, I mean, I love the way that they marketed this movie, because you think it's all about the girl, and it's, spoiler alert, it's not really about the girl at all. And this movie, I realize, is not for everyone. Like, if you're a big, like, slasher fan, or, like, you really need a lot of gore and a lot of action in your horror movies, this movie is not for you. But this movie is exactly what I call for anytime we ever review a horror movie or talk about horror movies in general, like movies like A Quiet Place, where they build it through character development, intention, and the score. All of that stuff is there in this movie. The only thing that I will say negative about this movie is it's definitely, I usually use this term as a term of endearment. I say that something's a slow burn because I like those types of movies, but this movie is kind of too much of a slow burn. Like, I want them to give us a little bit more quicker, and like it sits in the tension and the atmosphere a tad too long for my taste. And I think if they wrapped everything up and started to really get into the scary and the horror elements a little bit quicker, because once you do get into those elements, they are really fucking terrifying because this movie does such a good job of building everything. But if they had gotten into it like maybe 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes earlier, I think it would have been a little bit more effective for me. And the last like minute of this movie is pretty ridiculous. Like, they kind of explain everything in the last like minute. And I thought that was kind of irritating because I've said this before on past episodes. Like, I want filmmakers to trust that they've done a good enough job explaining things throughout the movie without actually explaining them. And I feel like when they do stuff like that, where they kind of like wrap up the entire movie in a couple of minutes, just I love Harry Potter, and those movies and those books do that every single goddamn movie and book, where like Dumbledore and Harry Potter like sit down and talk through the entire book, and it's super annoying. Yeah, that's kind of how I felt in Hereditary at the very end, and which is weird because the entire movie is fantastic, and then you have the last minute, and it kind of leaves a sour taste in your mouth. At least it did for me, and I think ultimately that's why it's only number 10 on my list.
Nice.
Are you guys not talking about it because you're going to talk about it later?
Possibly.
Yeah. I kind of figured as much. So, Matt, what is your number 9?
My number 9 is Blind Spotting, with Daveed Diggs and Raphael Casal. It's a really great, like, again, kind of social commentary movie that is about Daveed Diggs witnessing a cop kill a black guy, and then while Daveed Diggs' character is 3 days away from being off of probation. So he's like 3 days away from getting his life back, and the movie is counting those 3 days as he's working with his friend, who's this kind of like loose cannon white guy who is very much annoyed by the gentrification that's taking place in Oakland. It takes place in Oakland. And just like the way that the movie kind of deals with the ramifications of Daveed Diggs' character's witnessing that crime, and the way that he and his friend bounce off of each other is just really just incredible. Like, it's really incredible writing, and there's a moment toward the end, like the big kind of climax of the movie is Daveed Diggs rapping. And he basically, it's like this raw emotional like performance that he gives, and it's just incredible. Like, it's really stuck with me. And it's a movie that really, I mean, it's kind of weird to say, but because I'm a 32-year-old white guy, but it really showcases how, like it puts a emphasis on kind of the black experience in America in the current age that we're in, and how it's just tense. That like there are moments where he's walking down the street and it's like I was terrified for him because there was like a police car nearby, and the way that the movie kind of demonstrates that is just really just intense and really eye-opening. So that's Blind Spotting. That's my number 9, and I loved it.
Tyler, have you seen this movie yet?
No, I want to, though.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about this movie a little bit later.
Nice.
So, yeah, I'll save most of what I was going to say for later. But you mentioned Sorry to Bother You as one of your honorable mentions. And as much as I liked that movie, some of the social commentary was a little bit heavy-handed for my taste, really heavy-handed in Sorry to Bother You. And I thought that it was much more well done in Blind Spotting, and that's why Blind Spotting made my top 10 and Sorry to Bother You didn't.
I agree. I agree with you there. And Sorry to Bother You just went into some very strange places.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and Blind Spotting was a lot more measured and real, I guess, or raw, I should say.
Oh yeah, for sure. So it was definitely more down to earth, like more realistic than Sorry to Bother You, which I think will hit on more like general audiences. Like I think a lot of people would be freaked out from Sorry to Bother You, and I think that Blind Spotting will hit more people because it's more down to earth for sure.
Exactly. Yep.
All right, Tyler, what is your number 9?
My number 9 is Searching, which is the movie that stars John Cho, about him looking for his 16-year-old daughter that's gone missing, that is filmed exclusively via, I guess, what would you say, like screens, like computer screens and phone screens, and things like that. So did we review this movie on the podcast, or was this something I was into? I can't remember.
I want to say that it was something that you were into, and at the time that you brought it up, I hadn't seen it, but I've seen it since.
Gotcha. So I haven't revisited this movie since I saw it in theaters, and I feel like I probably should have whenever I was putting this list together, because a thriller like this, where you know what ends up happening, probably takes away from it on future viewings, but that initial viewing for me was really amazing. And something that I put a lot of stock into whenever I make these lists is my theater viewing. And my theater viewing of Searching, like I'm saying, was fantastic. I didn't know too much about the movie going into it, and I thought that it was a really, really well put together thriller. And then not only that, but just a really well put together mystery. And just when you think things couldn't get any worse, they start to get worse. And, as things kind of fall into place, I was pretty shocked. I also want to say that the performances in this movie were really great. John Cho, especially, since it's almost exclusively him. The way that he portrays this dad that's dealing with this and is slowly spiraling into this madness as he's counting down the time that his daughter's been gone was really great. Deborah Messing, I think whenever I talked about it, I mean, she's just Deborah Messing. She's not great. She's not bad. She kind of plays herself. But the rest of the supporting cast I thought was really great as well. So yeah, I just thought that it was a really well put together thriller. I think that you could maybe say the same thing about some other movies released this year, like A Quiet Place, in that the way that it was filmed was a bit gimmicky. But I legitimately think that the way that it was put together added to the movie-going experience and the film itself.
Yeah, so like I said, I have seen this movie since you talked about it the first time on the podcast, and when I see a movie, the way that I put together my list is I always tag it with like best of or whatever year it is on Letterboxd, and that's kind of how I keep track of all the movies that I like throughout the year, so I don't forget about one. And this is a movie that when I was making my list for this episode, I was like, oh yeah, like I tagged it best of, but I had forgotten that not that it existed, but it didn't stay with me at all. Like, it was a really cool movie, and I loved the turn at the very end, which of course I won't spoil for anybody that hasn't seen it yet, but it just didn't stay with me. Like, it's a really cool movie. I think that John Cho does an amazing job. Like, this movie doesn't work if he's not amazing in it, and he definitely is. But like I said, it just didn't stick with me. So since I kind of forgot about it, I felt like it wasn't worthy, obviously, to make my list.
That's fair. I saw this movie actually twice in theaters, and it does have a little bit of diminishing returns when you see it again, just because you know, like, all the things. But it also, on the flip side, it also gives you stuff to look for, because like they seed like a lot of things early in the movie that come to fruition later. So there's stuff that you may overlook in the first viewing, but I just want to say, like, John Cho's performance is just incredible, especially considering that for the majority of the movie he is acting against nothing. Like, he's there alone, and it's a really remarkable performance. It didn't make my top 10 or anything, but it's definitely a very good thriller. Yeah.
Cool, man. So my number 9 is Game Night. So this was a movie that every year there's a movie that comes out of nowhere. Because, I mean, obviously we're a big fan of the big summer blockbusters that come out. All the MCU movies, and a lot of my list always includes at least a couple of those types of movies. But then there's always movies like Game Night that come out of nowhere that I have zero expectations going into it, and they just completely blow me away. And that was this movie for me this year. I just didn't really expect a whole lot. I love Jason Bateman, but other than that, I didn't really have any expectations going in, and it was just so funny. Like, I didn't expect it to be as funny as it was, and not just for it to be funny, but I thought that it was really smart too. Mm-hmm. Like, it was a really smart comedy, and I really definitely appreciate those types of movies. Like, there's one bit that they do so well in this movie that I've actually seen the movie since I saw it the first time, because it's definitely a movie that I wanted to see more than once before I put it on my list. They do this bit where there's this couple that it's revealed that one of them has slept with a celebrity. And right. It's like a recurring bit throughout the entire movie. And then once you get the celebrity that this person has slept with, like, that end game is so well played. It's really, really funny. And I was surprised that still, after I knew what was going to happen the second time I saw it, I was still, I mean, I still cracked up when they reveal what actually happened with this so-called celebrity. So, yeah, it's a really, really funny movie. It's just a really good time. Like, if you just want to sit down and just relax and have something that's not going to tax you as far as the plot and stuff is concerned. Some of the turns are kind of ridiculous. Like, this whole genre of like these one night, like crazy adventure types of movies is kind of played out, but I think that this movie does it really, really well.
Yeah, I need to see this movie again because I saw it once and it left an impression on me, but not enough to really like leave a big like impression when I was making my list. But yeah, it's so much fun, and I completely forgot about the payoff of the whole celebrity thing, and like that, it just kind of came screaming back to me when you were talking about it, and it's hysterical. Like it is a very well done bit in the movie. That's just. I loved that, so I'll have to revisit Game Night.
I revisited Game Night a month or two ago on HBO, and it holds up. It's a really funny movie. I just don't think it hit for me quite like it hit for you. I still got a lot of enjoyment out of my second viewing, and still consider it one of the better movies this year, but not enough to make my list.
Fair enough. So, Matt, what is your number 8?
Okay, my number 8 is A Quiet Place, and this is a movie that I was looking forward to when I started seeing the trailers, because the trailers were like that first trailer where it's completely silent and I think there's just a little bit of music playing is just so intense and very good. And the movie is that in a nutshell. Like it's completely inventive the way that they do the tension, because in a lot of like thriller movies and horror movies, it's a lot of like jump scares and just moody music that's playing to kind of make you feel tense and everything. But the first like 10-15 minutes of A Quiet Place is completely silent, and it is just amazing what effect that has on you. And like you guys mentioned, your movie theater experience being important to it, to making your top 10. And A Quiet Place for me was an incredible theater experience specifically because I saw it opening weekend and it was a pretty filled in theater. Like it was a pretty full theater. And just those moments where it's completely quiet and the audience is completely quiet. It's like, I don't know that I can't remember a time when I've experienced like a completely silent movie theater like that, and where everyone is so wrapped up in the story and what's going on, and the movie is as quiet as the audience is, and that just it felt so, it made the movie more unsettling because of that. And I rewatched it like a week or so ago, and it still holds up. Just the storytelling is really good. And even though the creatures are kind of a little reminiscent of like Cloverfield and stuff, it still doesn't detract from the movie for me, because I still thought it was a really inventive and well done suspenseful horror movie. And that's A Quiet Place, and that's my number 8.
Yeah, this movie was okay. I liked it, and I think that I was probably a little hard on it when we talked about it on the podcast, and I probably shouldn't have used the word gimmicky, but I did, and it did make my list, so.
Yeah, I kind of assumed it wouldn't make Tyler's list, but I talked a little bit about it because it was an honorable mention for me. It just, the theater experience, like you talked about, Matt, was also pretty good. I don't think that there was as much silence in the theater as I would like, because there was some high schoolers that were watching this movie, not with us, but they were in the same theater, and yeah, they weren't as quiet as I would have liked them to be, but yeah, it doesn't hold up as much the second or third time you watch it. So yeah, I really wanted to have this movie crack my top 10, but it obviously ultimately didn't, because it was just an honorable mention for me.
Cool.
All right, so I believe we're on my number 8, which is Hereditary. So
awesome. Nice.
A lot of this has to do with the theater going experience. Anytime that somebody you're with jumps out of their seat at a scare, it's a good movie. No, but I think that whenever we were talking about this movie after we got out of it last summer, I said on the drive back to the city that I don't know that I'd ever watch it again. And I have watched it a couple times since, and for me, it's getting better with each viewing because I'm picking up on other things, and I think that this movie is just very well crafted, and Ari Aster, the director of this movie, just meticulously pieced together the story and the threads that all kind of culminate with that crazy ending. I do think that anytime you're in a movie and you don't know what's going to happen, like to Pat's credit, what he said with the marketing of this movie, you think it's one thing and it's definitely not that. So going into it, not knowing what's going to happen and just kind of sitting there with your jaw on the ground because of what's going on the screen. Like one scene in particular that, I mean, anybody that's seen this movie probably knows what I'm talking about. Like anytime you have stuff like that in a film, I think that it lingers with you. So this movie definitely lingered with me for a few days. And like I said, it's something that I've revisited a few times, and I come to appreciate it each time I watch it. Toni Collette is amazing in it. I think that her performance is probably underappreciated. I think that she deserved a Golden Globe nomination for the performance she gives in this movie, and she didn't get it, which is disappointing because this movie is definitely a spectacle.
Oh yeah, she's phenomenal in this movie. She has to be, almost like when we talked about John Cho in Searching. Like, if she's not amazing in this movie, it doesn't work. And she is amazing, and it definitely works.
Yep, and I'll talk about Hereditary in a little bit.
All right, cool, man. So my number 8 is Deadpool 2. I think that the first one made my top 10 list of whatever year that was when that first movie came out, and I'm definitely a fan of these movies. I think the first one is not quite as funny as it thinks it is, and what really surprised me about Deadpool 2 is not only the comedy I thought was a little bit better, like the hit rate. The joke density is probably just as high in Deadpool 2 as it is in Deadpool 1, but the joke hit rate for me hit a lot more than it did in the first one. But the thing that really kept me coming back to this movie is I thought that it had more heart in the sequel than it did in the original, which is surprising. Like, you don't see that very often. Like in the first one, and I'm going to harken back to, I think, something that I talked about when we reviewed this movie, is I think I saw a quote from Ryan Reynolds saying, like, Deadpool 3 probably won't happen because the key to this character is you have to keep taking things away from him, and you can't just keep taking things away from him. Like, that can't just be the formula for these movies because it gets tired pretty quickly. And the first movie, they kind of took away his vanity because he was this good-looking guy, and now he's this ugly person. Now, granted, they kind of took away his girlfriend at the same time, but most of it was because they created what he thinks he looks like a monster, and then ultimately, by the end of the movie, she doesn't care. And then the second one, they actually, spoiler alert, I guess, but it happens within the first, 15 minutes of the movie, they take away her. And I thought that connection was a lot more deep than in the first one. Like, I felt like they just kind of took away his vanity in the first one, and in the second one, that connection was just more deep for me, and that's why it kind of hit harder than the first one did for me. But I like both of them. I just like the second one a little bit better.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wish I had a chance to rewatch Deadpool 2 before making my list, because it's not anywhere on my list or honorable mentions, but it was still a really good movie, and I had a lot of fun with the theater experience too. But especially since they had so much money to throw at it versus what they had in the first one. But yeah, I liked it a lot. It just didn't make my list.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add outside of what I said when it was on my honorable mentions.
All right, cool, man. So your number 7, Matt?
My number 7 is Mission Impossible Fallout.
Awesome.
And yes, if you had told me a year or two ago that, hey, you're going to have the sixth entry in the Mission Impossible franchise on your top 10 list in 2018, I would have called bullshit because I actually hadn't, like a little peek behind the curtain, I had no intention of seeing Mission Impossible Fallout because I hadn't watched the other ones previous to that. And then I got A-List and all the reviews were coming in about Fallout. And so I was like, you know what, I'll watch the Mission Impossible movies and then go see Fallout. And I did that, and it just blew me away. The action set pieces and everything, like there's a motorcycle chase that I have no idea how they did it. Like I don't know how it's possible that they could film that in that busy area that fluidly and that just really action heavy kind of way. Same with like the helicopter chase, the halo jump, everything. Like it's so just intense and incredible. And like I rewatched it a couple days ago, and after I finished I was like, I kind of want to watch this again, just because it's so fun and energetic and intense. And I just had so much fun with this movie, and I'm so excited to watch it again. Mission Impossible Fallout, that's my number 7. And also they add more development to the Ethan Hunt character, which I appreciated too. But Mission Impossible Fallout's my number 7.
Yeah, so this isn't going to be on my list at all. I know it was an honorable mention for Tyler. I didn't get into this movie at all. I know that I don't feel like I shit on it when we reviewed it. I just didn't like it as much as I think a lot of people did, obviously, because it made both of your lists, so to speak. But I don't know. Part of it is I hate Henry Cavill. Like, he's the worst actor working today. I've said that before. He's so bad. And he's not good in this movie either. Like, he's probably the best I've seen him be in anything, but that's not setting the bar too high because, like I said, he's the worst. So, yeah, I couldn't get into this movie.
Yeah, I liked him a lot in this movie, but to each their own. There's the famous thing where he reloads his arms in the bathroom fight. It's the most ridiculous thing, but I get so much excitement out of it because it's just so dumb, but it's such a cool like action movie moment. I don't know. I dug it. I like it a lot.
I feel like he probably does that in real life because he seems like a douchebag.
No, I love this movie. I love Henry Cavill in this movie. I love his arc in that movie. All the practical effects, like I said. So I'm with you, Matt. Fuck Pat.
Nice.
All right, cool. So what's your number 7, Tyler?
My number 7 is Black Panther. So, I don't know. It's a really good movie, man. This movie was very, very culturally important when it came out last February, and I don't think that anybody expected it to have the impact that it ended up having, and it's something that we're still talking about. It's just such a well put together movie. Ryan Coogler is an amazing filmmaker, and that really shows through in this film. Like they built a universe within a universe, which was really cool. The performances are outstanding. Chadwick Boseman is perfect as T'Challa, and then being able to get Michael B. Jordan on board as Killmonger was amazing. And then if you look down the cast list, it just keeps going. Like you have Lupita Nyong'o and Danny I don't know how you say her last name. Gura from Walking Dead, and I just suck with these names. The guy from Get Out, Daniel Kaluuya. Yeah, and then Winston Duke. Like it just keeps going. There's so many great.
No, I want you to keep going. Movie. Try to keep saying their names.
I could do it. Sterling K. Brown. That was an easy one. Forrest Whitaker, Andy Serkis. It's just like you talk about an ensemble cast. Like that is probably one of the best casts out of any movie last year. And the performances that Ryan Coogler was able to get out of the cast was amazing. The only thing that I really didn't like about this movie, and it seems petty, is the rhinoceroses.
So stupid. So stupid.
So, they it sounds really dumb, but if they had just left that out of this movie, it'd probably be a spot or two higher on my list, because it kind of took me out of it, because even though it's a superhero movie and even though you have to suspend your your belief when you see a movie like this. Everything about it, they were able to make feel really grounded. Like from the opening scene in Oakland to the way the movie closes, like, yeah, Wakanda is like this magical place and they have this magic metal that makes their world turn. But at the end of the day, it's very connected to the real world and what's going on outside of Wakanda. And I love the dilemma on whether or not they should open their doors to the rest of the world. And I don't know, man. I could keep going. It's just so very beautifully put together movie.
Mm-hmm.
So this movie will be on my list later, so I don't want to talk too much about it. I will double down on what you said about the rhinos. I feel like that was just a big middle finger to everybody. Like the rhinos were so stupid, and then they bring the rhinos back. Like they double down on the rhinos, and it was ridiculous. They're like, "We don't care what you guys think. We know that you're gonna hate them, but we're gonna bring them back anyways."
Yeah, I loved Black Panther, but it doesn't appear on my list. But I kind of feel like some of the CGI doesn't really hold up that much, even though it just came out. Like it's less than a year old, and like the rhinos are the big one. Like they look ridiculous. But I really liked it. I loved it. And the cast is amazing. But I think that another MCU movie kind of overtook it last year. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point about the CGI, because I remember thinking that on a couple of other viewings of that movie last year, that the CGI didn't hold up. So that's two Andy Serkis movies last year with really shitty CGI. So
go fuck yourself. So my number 7, and I think Tyler's going to roll his eyes pretty hard when I say this, but it is Overlord. So this is a movie that we reviewed that I loved, and Tyler didn't particularly like that much. So I don't want to say hate. Did you hate this movie? You didn't
No, not at all.
Movie, right?
I didn't hate this movie. No.
You just didn't like it as much. And I said this on our review, so a lot of this is going to be rehashing our review. But I think that movies like this, and I kind of talked a little bit from Dusk Till Dawn and The Descent and those types of movies where they work on different levels and within different genres. Like I think Overlord works, especially the first scene where they're in the plane, like works so well as a war movie. And then the shit hits the fan and it gets to this like super campy, cheesy, zombie-esque type of movie at the very end. And that works really well. And I had a lot of fun with that part. But the character work was surprisingly well done in this movie. And the war stuff, again, was surprisingly well done. And I knew I was going to like the cheesiness of it at the end. But I was definitely surprised at how much I liked the other stuff leading up to it. I will say that upon thinking about it, it is a tad bit too long. Like the build up to it does take a little bit too long for my taste. And that's why it's a little bit further down the list than I originally thought it was going to be. But I had a lot of fun with this movie.
Yeah, it's a blast. Any movie that has just very gruesome Nazi deaths is like right up there for me. Like I loved, like I got such a weird kick out of seeing just Nazis getting just exploded and killed. And I liked it a lot. It was good.
All right. So
I feel like you put this on.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I feel like you put this on your list to troll me, so I wasn't going to comment. I will say that it made my top 34. So
okay, sweet. The lucky 34, as we call it. So Matt, I am the worst person to be the one that'd be like, oh yeah, this is the next one that we're going to talk about, because I'm gonna fuck up what number we're on. But I think we're on number 6, right?
Yes, we're on number 6, and my number 6 is an HBO movie called The Tale. It has Laura Dern as a woman who is uncovering a trauma in her past. She was sexually assaulted and raped in her past, and like it's the discovery of a a story that she wrote as an 8th grader is what kind of propels her to realize, like, oh, this was like I was a victim of a heinous act and everything. So the movie depicts her just kind of coming to terms with that and remembering like bits and pieces and putting together like what really happened to her and kind of dealing with that. And the reason why it's on my list and the reason why it struck such a chord with me is that it's written and directed by a documentarian named Jennifer Fox, and it's her story. Like, it is her true story. Like, this really happened to her. And Laura Dern's character, Laura Dern is playing Jennifer Fox. Like, it is, like, it's her story, her character. There's no, like, fictitious thing or anything. It's just a very raw, like, incredibly personal story. And the way that they do this back and forth between like the past and present, like you see there's this technique that she uses where you see like her memory of something from the past when she was 13, but her memory is that she was much older. She was like an older young adult when it happened. But then when she realizes like she sees a picture and she realizes like, wait, this is what I looked like when I was 13. And then it goes back and it shows like the real, like she was like a fucking child. And it just shows like it really brings home just how heinous and just how disturbing this was for her to go through. And it makes my list because it had a profound impact on me, because all I could think was that this filmmaker is telling her story in this very true way, and it's not shying away from anything in it. And it's just like this, it's like this really personal kind of cathartic thing for this particular filmmaker. And I just have tons of admiration for her that she had the courage to do this and make this movie the way that she did. And it's just a very effective personal like drama that's just really heartbreaking and really disturbing also. Like Jason Ritter and Elizabeth Debicki play these two like adults from her past, and like they give just chilling performances that are just so like real, like authentic to predatory behavior, that it's just so disturbing and uneasy that it just stuck with me for a while. So that's number 6. That's The Tale, and it is on HBO.
I have never heard of this movie, and I recently, now that last week tonight took a break from HBO, they took their season break or whatever you want to call it. I canceled HBO Now, and I'm going to re-up or renew, whatever you want to call it, when Game of Thrones Season 8, right before it comes out, because I want to rewatch all of Game of Thrones, and I will definitely make a note to watch this movie, because it sounds amazing.
Nice.
Yeah, similar to Pat, I literally canceled HBO Now yesterday. So, not something that I can readily watch, but it does sound interesting, and I've really grown to like Elizabeth Debicki. Mm-hmm. So the fact that she's in this makes it something I want to watch as well. So,
yep.
Awesome. Tyler, what is your number 6?
My number 6 is Halloween. So,
nice.
This is another movie I wish that I could have watched again before putting my list together. I've only seen it the one time in theaters, but that one time in theaters was amazing. So if you go back and you listen to our review of it from October, you'll hear Pat and I basically jerk this movie off, but it is pretty fantastic. So David Gordon Green and Danny McBride obviously love the originals and that love letter. Or, I mean, this movie is definitely a love letter to those. Jamie Lee Curtis is amazing in this movie. She plays this person who's obviously been impacted at a post-traumatic stress disorder level 40 years later very well. Judy Greer, I kind of have a thing for Judy Greer, so she's also amazing in this movie. I don't know, it's just a very, very effective horror movie. Obviously putting it above Hereditary. I'm a big sucker for nostalgia, and this is like the perfect example of something like that. It's so in line with those first 2 Halloween movies. It definitely just feels like it's part of the universe. And it also features one of my favorite, probably my favorite movie moment of 2018, which I can't really spoil, but it has to do with Judy Greer's character at the end of this movie. When they're trying to take down Michael. I just love that moment so much, and just thinking about it gives me goosebumps. So great cast, great script, great directing. It just lives up to the hype of the franchise. And for those of us that, consider Halloween our favorite horror franchise of all time, it's a healthy, great addition to that library of movies.
So we don't discuss our lists before we start this episode, and my number 6 is also Halloween, so it kind of worked out that way.
Sweet.
That's just obviously coincidence. I will mention that I also have a thing for Judy Greer, so it's kind of funny that you brought that up as well, but that's only because she's in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, and I love that fucking movie. So anybody that's in that movie, I kind of have a thing for now. So
doesn't she play an ape, though?
Yeah, she's Caesar's wife.
And so you have a thing for her because she plays an ape.
Yes.
I'm starting to think this Planet of the Apes thing with you goes a lot deeper and darker than what.
Oh, I don't feel like I've made that a secret. It's clear that I want to bag these monkeys.
My God.
I mean, I didn't feel like I needed to say that. I feel like that was always inferred, but Tyler finally made me say it. But I completely lost my train of thought because I started talking about bagging monkeys. No, Halloween, what really, I mean, other than the fact that, like you said, I mean, the filmmakers love this franchise. It's pretty clear that they love this franchise. And I love the way that they made Jamie Lee Curtis's, like, they basically say in the movie that she could have gone either one or two ways. She could have been scared for her entire life, or that she could have just been this crazy badass. And I love that they made her this crazy badass, because I think a lot of lesser filmmakers would have gone the other route. And we've seen that so many other times in other movies that it makes me feel so good that they went the other route. Plus, the tracking shot following Michael through the town on Halloween is so fucking cool. Like, when I think about this movie, I think about that one shot and how cool it is to watch him. Like, even when he turns the corner and you can see his shadow line walking on the fence, it's so fucking cool, man. As a film nerd, I just love that scene so much.
I totally agree with that. And like, spoiler again, it doesn't appear on my list, but I need to rewatch it. Just because, like you said, that tracking shot is just insane. And I think that part of the reason why it didn't make my list is that it treats podcasters in a certain manner that I didn't appreciate. So, yeah, but I really liked it a lot. Yeah.
All right, so what is your number 5?
My number 5 is Hereditary.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, the movie that the three of us saw in the theater together. That was super fun. That was a super nice, like, adventure we had. But I don't know why I said it like that. But this movie is so intense, and like after seeing it for like about probably 2 weeks, I would randomly like think about that big scene kind of in the middle or in the first half of the movie, or first third of the movie. I won't spoil it, but there's a big event that happens that ushers us into the next act of the movie. And like, just the way that is shot and the way that it is depicted and the fallout from that, like the way that Nat Wolff reacts to throughout like the next like several moments of the movie was so just unsettling and uneasy to me that it stuck with me and had just a really like profound effect on me, because it was just so just eerie and unsettling and so real. So much so that it took me like 5 or 6 months before I even rewatched the movie because I was so just nervous to like have that unsettled feeling kind of resurface for me. And I think that's the mark of a really great horror movie, to have me feel that way. Like, a lot of times when horror movies come out, there's a lot of like talk of like, oh, was it scary or was it not? And a lot of times it's like the the definition of like scary for people is like, oh, did it make you jump? Which, as you guys have been so kind to point out several times, it did make me jump. But the way that I kind of measure horror now as like an adult is like I'm not looking for like jump scares or like oh, this is scary in this moment. I'm looking for things that have like a scary, thrilling effect on my psyche, like something that'll stick with me. And the way that this movie depicts this family grieving in like that dinner scene, particularly Toni Collette, is like, I agree with you guys. Like, she should have been nominated for a Golden Globe. If she's not nominated for an Oscar, I will be so furious because her performance is incredible. Like, she is so great in this movie. And even though it does kind of, like, I have some qualms with the ending a little bit, I still think it's just a really well put together horror movie and a hell of a first movie from Ari Aster, whatever his name is. It's just, I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does next. And yeah, Hereditary. It terrified me on a deep, deep level.
So kind of behind the curtains, when I listen to the podcast that I listen to, and they always go through their top 10 video games or movies or whatever podcast I'm listening to, I generally will listen to those types of episodes with like a notepad or whatever open on my phone or an actual notepad, and I'll write down like games or movies or TV shows or whatever that I haven't seen that they talk about, because I want to experience those things that somebody that I listen to every week thinks is really good. So if you're listening to this like I listened to these types of episodes, and we've all three have talked about Hereditary, if you haven't seen it, you definitely should be watching it, because the three of us liked it enough to include it on our list. So that should tell you a little bit how we all feel about this movie.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. It's so good. I really liked it. Yeah.
All right. So Tyler, what is your number 5?
My number 5 is The Incredibles 2. Nice. So I've gone on record quite a few times about what a big Disney fan I am, but I'm also a fan of great movies, and this is a great movie. So I was hesitant when this movie was coming out, if our listeners recall, because I thought that they should have aged the characters since such a big time has passed from Incredibles 1 to Incredibles 2, but they chose to pretty much pick this movie up exactly where the first one left off. And while I still feel like they should have aged the characters, it didn't detract from this movie. It is still a great movie that is very, very well written. They really capture the family dynamic in this film quite well, which I definitely appreciate. And on the other side of the writing is that it's very clever and very funny dialogue that they've written. Like, this feels like a genuine family that just so happens to be superheroes, which is pretty cool. On top of that, the animation is amazing as well. And I feel like between the animation, the comedy, and the family dynamics, that, you know, this kind of results in this really beautiful family film. So not only is it great from an animation standpoint and great as a family film, but I think that it is underappreciated in it being just a fantastic action movie. The scene in particular where Elastigirl is chasing the train on her motorcycle is so well put together, and I can't even imagine like the storyboards that go into creating something like that in animation form. But you know, it's not just a Disney Pixar movie. Like I said, it's a great action movie as well. Brad Bird obviously cares a lot about this family that he created, and I think that really shows up in this really funny, action-packed Disney film.
Nice. I loved that scene with Elastigirl and that action set piece. That was one of the most memorable scenes I saw maybe all year. Didn't make my list though, but it was still really good.
Yeah, so longtime listeners know that I really just can't get into The Incredibles for whatever reason. I just never really liked the first one that much, and we saw the second one, and we reviewed the second one, and I felt very similar about the second one as I did the first one. I just can't really get into those movies as much as I love Pixar movies. For some reason, you would think that this movie would be right up my alley because I love superheroes and I love Pixar movies, and that's what this movie is, but I just really, really couldn't get into it. And I think most of that is because I think Mr. Incredible is a terrible character. Like, he's a terrible dude. Like, I just don't think that he's a very good father, and I don't think that he's a very likable character.
Perfect. What's your number 5, Pat?
So when I make these lists, I always have a couple of movies that are like right next to each other that I flip-flop a lot, and this is the first couple of movies that I kept flip-flopping back and forth, but I think this is like the 5th or 6th episode like this that we've done since we started this podcast, and it's taken me 5 or 6 years of kind of listening to Tyler for him to finally kind of get into my head when I was making this list. And his thing has always been like, when he's making this list, what movie are we going to watch like 10 years from now? What movie are we going to watch more than the other one? And there are 2 movies right back to back that I'll get to here in a little bit that I put Blind Spotting at number 5 because I thought that I would watch the other one that I ultimately put at number 4 more in the long run 10 years from now. So Blind Spotting, that we've already talked about, Matt brought it up earlier in the episode. I will just double down on everything that he said. The one thing that he brought up that really, really connected with me in this movie versus a movie like Sorry to Bother You is I felt, even like Matt said, like being a 32-year-old white man, well, I'm only 31, but I can kind of relate. I mean, he is a little bit older than me, but I am a white man. I'm literally the whitest person, literally and figuratively, that you will ever meet in your entire life. So it was surprising to me how much terror I felt with this character. Like you said, him, like, there are scenes where he gets like stopped by the police, and the terror that I feel, I have never felt that way. Like other movies, especially this year, like Widows tries to do this, and Sorry to Bother You try to do this, and Black Klansman try to do this, and I just didn't feel it as much as I felt it in Blind Spotting. And another thing that I really liked about this movie is it really kind of comes across like he's a bigger black guy with braids, and everybody kind of treats him like he's gonna be like the scary character in this movie, but in reality it's his friend that's a white guy, that he's kind of like the loose cannon, and he's actually the guy that people should be afraid of, but because he's white, I think that he kind of gets a pass in this movie. And it's a really interesting dynamic, and it's a movie that I think would have been higher if I had seen it a couple of years ago, like just the way that I made these lists. But the reason that I wanted to really I kept coming back to this movie is that even though it deals with some heavy stuff, the dynamic between the 2 friends has some comedic moments in it as well. And so I think that in 10 years, I will definitely rewatch this movie because the comedic elements will keep me coming back to it, versus a movie like, I think a couple of years ago, The End of the Tour was on my list, and I've never watched that movie since. I'm sure it's a fine movie. I mean, it made my list for a reason, but I have never watched it because it's not really that funny of a movie. And I think that a movie like Blind Spotting, even though it does deal with some deep stuff, especially towards the end, it does have some lighter moments in it, and I think that's why 10 years from now I will still watch this movie.
Totally. Yeah, it's again, it's a really remarkable movie that I probably should have put higher on my list. But
for sure.
But yeah, well said.
All right, so what is your number 4?
My number 4 is Avengers Infinity War. This freaking movie, my God. Like, I am so amazed that Marvel Studios pulled it off. Like, not that I had any doubt that they would, but just the sheer fact that this movie exists is incredible to me. Like, it's they've had 20 movies over the last 10 years. They put it all together in this movie that my big reservation going into it was that, okay, we've seen hints of Thanos here and there over the last 10 years, yet I don't there's nothing to him yet. All it is just the threat of this dude with a glove. Having not read the comics, that's how I went into Infinity War thinking of Thanos, but just from the word go, it's clear that Avengers Infinity War is Thanos' movie. And they develop him I would say much better than any villain in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Hard stop right there. That's my feel on him. And the way that they develop him is not that he's formidable, he's imposing, he's threatening, but they also develop him as this character who is insane, but has this his motivation for wanting to take to destroy half of life in the universe. It follows this internal logic that he has, that it makes sense for his character why he wants to do that, and it's so incredible how they can balance that. It's just great. And the fight on Titan with him and several of the Avengers is one of the greatest team up superhero fight sequences I've seen, because it's so good, so fluid, and it's so great. And a lot of the more tragic moments in the movie really hit with me, not necessarily the big moment at the end, because it's given what happens, that it's gonna Endgame is gonna rectify some things, I think, but it's such an incredible movie, and I'm still just super amazed that it was even achieved, because this movie should not work as well as it does, because it should be bloated, it should have way too much going on, it should have faulty CGI, it should have so many things working against it, but it works so well, and it comes together in such a great way that I loved it. I've seen it probably 5 times now probably, and I can't get enough of it. It's so much fun. It's great, and I can't wait for Endgame here in a few months. I'm kind of really anxious for that.
Oh yeah, for sure. And the fact that you described Thanos as a villain with a glove, I am very disappointed that I haven't seen Avengers Michael Jackson memes yet. I feel like that's criminal that somebody hasn't come up with that yet.
Yeah, you'd almost say it's smooth criminal.
Nice.
God damn it. Nice. And that's why Tyler is my co-host. I was like, cool. I need somebody with awesome Michael Jackson puns. All right.
I will talk about Infinity War shortly. So
nice. Yeah, I will as well. So we'll save that for here in a little bit. So Tyler, what is your number 4?
My number 4 is Won't You Be My Neighbor? So
okay.
I don't have a ton to say about this movie that I didn't already say last summer whenever it was what I was into. But life sucks, and the world sucks, and the politics of America sucks. But Fred Rogers was amazing. And so watching this documentary about this just genuinely good person that genuinely wanted to help kids and teach kids was a breath of fresh air in a year that kind of blew a lot. So for me, that's why that movie hit home. Obviously, I knew Fred Rogers from being a big fan of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood whenever I was really young, but I never really knew who he was as a person or just how good of a person he was. And being able to see a light kind of shined on that throughout this movie, this documentary, was really, really gratifying. So I think one of the things I said last summer was I'm pretty sure Mr. Rogers would be really disappointed in the bag of shit I grew up to be, because he wanted all the kids he watched that show to grow up to be great people like he was. But at the end of the day, just seeing that movie kind of helped me refocus a few things and prioritize a little bit better in my life. So that's why it's so high up on my list. It's a very great documentary about a very great person.
Nice.
Yeah, I immediately watched this, like, as soon as you brought it up for what you're into after that episode. I think it was like later that night, my wife and I watched this, and it's a really good documentary. It's well put together. The subject is really interesting. I just obviously didn't get into it as much as you did, as much as I enjoyed that show growing up. I don't know. I feel so disconnected because I'm even a bigger bag of shit than you are. So, I mean, that's easily said. I mean, it's clear the bigger bag of shit between the two of us. So, yeah, I didn't connect with it as much as you did.
And I will be talking about it in a little bit.
Awesome. So, it's my turn. Yep. So the movie that I kept going back and forth with blind spotting is Black Panther. And, I mean, we've hit on this movie a little bit already. So, again, I'm just rehashing things that have already been said. I will say that when you guys talked about it, the CGI is a little weird for an MCU movie. Like, it, especially with the rhinos are really stupid. And the CGI on those rhinos is pretty bad. So, I will say that the guy from Get Out, his arc isn't the best in this movie, but everything else, now that I've said a few negatives about it, everything else in this movie is phenomenal. And the fact that, again, I'm a 31-year-old white guy that really connected to a majority African-American cast and really just strong African movie surprised me how much I connected with this movie, and that tells you how good the movie is. That even though that we're 30-plus-year-old white guys and we love this movie, says a lot to the quality of the movie. It certainly doesn't hurt for me that Andy Serkis, my boy, is in this movie, and I thought that he did a phenomenal job. I think that he is a little underused in this movie, but other than that, he did an amazing job. Michael B. Jordan, I mean, such an amazing actor, being in an MCU movie, especially this movie, is just perfect casting. And yeah, I love the movie. Again, CGI could be a little bit better, but other than that, just a really, really awesome movie.
Nice.
Perfect.
All right, Matt, so what is your number 3?
Okay, so my number 3 is it's Roma, Alfonso Cuarón's latest movie that's on Netflix. Interestingly enough, it's his first movie since Gravity in 2013, and it's a movie that has kind of stuck with me since I watched it. I've watched it a couple times now because I was trying to decide where to put it. Basically, the movie is a year in the life of a maid in 1970 in a Mexican city. And the thing about the movie that really struck a chord with me is that it has this feel that it's an intensely personal movie for Alfonso Cuarón, because it's based on his again, this is the second movie on my list that has this kind of thing, but it's based on his history, his personal experience, and the experience of his family's like maid while he was growing up. So it's an intensely personal movie for him, and it comes across really well in Roma. It's a very slow burn movie, but it is one of the most visually just beautiful movies I've ever seen. It's completely in black and white, but the thing about like Alfonso Cuarón is that one of his signatures is the long take. Like, he does like extended takes that last like multiple minutes and are extremely elaborate. And that's no different here. Like, there are things that happen in this movie that is all filmed on one take that, like, I don't know how it's achieved or why they would do, like, why he would make it so difficult for him to shoot a film like this, but it's so beautifully done. And it really brings you into to the story and the character of Cleo is the maid's name, and it's a really remarkable movie. And one of the things that we reviewed it on Obsessive Viewer. One of the things I didn't really touch on in that review was that, like, we referenced that it kind of seems like Cuarón makes references to his past movies, like Children of Men, Y Tu Mama Tambien, and Gravity in particular. And what I didn't realize at the time, because there's a scene in Roma where they go, the kids and the maid go to see a movie, and the movie, like, we see it on screen that it's a movie of two astronauts stranded in space with one has like a jetpack kind of thing. It's Gravity essentially. But what I didn't realize is that that's an actual movie. Like, they were seeing this movie called Marooned that came out in like 1969. And what's amazing to me is that this scene in Roma is basically showing us the inspiration that Alfonso Cuarón had to make Gravity, like, because he saw this movie when he was a kid, and it's just I don't know, that kind of meta thing was really what struck me on rewatching it. But the movie is just beautifully shown, and like it goes into some very like tragic and heartfelt things that it doesn't shy away from, or it doesn't kind of it doesn't sugarcoat anything. And by the end, it's just a very beautifully told story, and I felt like I lived with these characters through the 2 hours and change that I saw it. So that's Roma. That's my number 3. I loved it, and Alfonso Cuarón is insane as a filmmaker. He's a genius. It's amazing.
Yeah, I've not seen it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I also haven't seen it, and I'm going to sound like a total douchebag. Again, hashtag bag of shit. But I was excited because, I'm always excited when a filmmaker like him puts out a movie on Netflix, because I think that filmmakers like him will, not that I don't think necessarily that Netflix needs it, but it feels like it almost like gives Netflix a little bit more cred along the industry. Like somebody like this would put one of their new films on Netflix exclusively. So when it dropped on Netflix, it like changed the Netflix background, and it just, if the fact that it's in black and white, just, it felt to me like it was kind of pretentious. And I was just like, nah, I'm gonna wait on this one. But I did get really excited when you talked about him, like, maybe referencing his other movies in this movie, because I was like, well, maybe they make a reference to Harry Potter, because he did like one Harry Potter movie. But no, that obviously wasn't the case.
Right. And also that would be kind of hard to do in 1970.
No, they had Wizard in 1970.
That's true. But yeah, and I totally get that feeling that it seems kind of pretentious a little bit as a movie. But when watching it, like, there's, like, just the way that it's filmed, it feels like it's just a classically filmed movie. Like, it feels like one of those movies that people are, like, in 20 years or like 30 years are going to be like, oh, Roma, that's that old classic movie from 2018 that was really well done. There was something else I was going to say, but I can't remember. It does. It's no Bird Box or Mowgli, but it does give Netflix some cred. So yeah. To be fair, I haven't actually seen Mowgli. I avoided that. Don't
see it.
Yeah. But yeah, so anyway, that's my number 3. As pretentious as it is, that's my number 3.
I mean, if I were given the task of describing you in one adjective, pretentious would be the adjective.
Well,
and now you know why we don't have any guests on our podcast.
I'll take it. That's fine.
So, Tyler, what was your number 3?
My number 3 is Avengers: Infinity War. So,
all right, sweet.
I think that Matt summed it up really well. But for me, if Black Panther came out last February, after that movie came out and did so well critically, and with audiences, I immediately thought, like, Avengers: Infinity War is not going to be able to live up to this. There's no way that, like, this movie had too big of an impact. And then it came out, and it was amazing. So I definitely agree with you, Matt, around the Thanos aspect of this movie. I think whenever you do movies like this, the question is always, how do you balance all of these heroes? How do you balance like this huge ensemble cast? And the way that you do it is you develop these characters in their own movies, and then when you bring them together, you're able to concentrate on developing the villain. So I think that that was an amazing point, that Thanos was just this guy that we saw in credit scenes or very minimally in Guardians of the Galaxy, and then he comes into this movie and it's 100% his movie. And I love that he's not just villainous for the sake of being villainous. Like, there's a reason he wants to do what he does. And, you know, the more that our culture develops, the more that I wish that we could wipe out half the population as well. So I definitely kind of get that. And I think that the other thing with this movie is, going into it, everybody was saying, who's going to die? Who's going to die? Who's going to die? Who's gonna... Like, that's all we talked about. And is it going to be Iron Man? Is it going to be Captain America? Is it going to be both of them? And realistically, if you're listening to this podcast, there's no way you've not seen Avengers Infinity War, but I'll still try not to spoil it. But at the end of that movie, what ends up happening is crazy, because that's like not what anyone expected. And yeah, like you said, it's going to be rectified in Endgame here in a few months, and things are going to change up from what we saw at the end of Infinity War. But in the moment, it was pretty shocking. And it was definitely one of the bigger theater moments I had in 2018, which is why it's so high up on my list. So yeah, everything about Avengers Infinity War holds up. It's an amazing movie, and that's why it's my number 3.
Yep.
So this is higher on my list, so I will be talking about it here in a little bit. So I'll just jump into my number 3, which is I had again another problem with what movie. Like, I had 2 movies that I was kind of going back and forth about, and the movie that I ultimately think that I will watch more ended up becoming my number 2 and leaving 8th Grade as my number 3. So I've actually seen 8th Grade a couple of times, and it holds up. I mean, I fucking love this movie when I first saw it in theaters. Like, I was like, this is going to be my number 1. And then obviously it ultimately dropped down to 3, but that doesn't mean that I don't love this movie. What really, I talked about this a little bit with Game Night, but as much as I like that bit about the celebrity sleeping with a celebrity, my favorite bit pretty much of any movie all year was when she eats a banana in this movie. It is so fucking funny, and it holds up so well on repeat viewings. And that's what really, like, oh my God, like, I have to make this movie like 2 or 3 at least because of that scene right there. But what really sticks with you is, and I've talked about this a little bit, is I have had a little bit of social anxiety growing up. Like, when I go back home and like visit with my grandma and like my aunts and uncles, like, that I used to grow up with, they always like shocked that I do the podcast and do stand up and YouTube, because literally my parents, like, when we would go on like long road trips, like, sometimes we would stop at a gas station and we'd be driving for like 40 minutes after we stopped, and they would like freak out because they thought they left me at the gas station because I haven't said a word in 40 minutes. Like, I just never talked at all. And now that I'm older and I've kind of come out of my shell, like, movies like this really hit home for me because I was that kid growing up. Obviously I didn't have social media and all that stuff, but I think that would have given me even more social anxiety because our lives are so public now. And yeah, I relate to that character, and the fact that Bo Burnham wrote this scene where she explains social anxiety as like this roller coaster. When you get off the roller coaster, like, you have that release, but social anxiety is you never have that release. And I still feel that. I'm not as nervous when I get on stage and like perform stand up or whatever, but I still have those butterflies in my stomach a little bit. And that's kind of the way I feel, and the way that he summed it up is so perfect. So I love this movie, and again, going back to what Tyler always says, like, what movie are we going to watch in 10 years? And I still think I'll be watching 8th Grade in 10 years.
Yep. Yeah. I've got nothing to add to that right now.
Okay.
I'm gonna, if you don't mind, Matt, I'm gonna leapfrog you because this is my number 2.
Sure thing.
All right,
So
sweet.
just to get my number 2 out of the way again, 8th grade. Everything you said, Pat. Like I am a social introvert. I have social anxiety, and I never thought that I'd relate to an 8th grade girl in a movie so much. Everything about this movie and the way that it explains those things is so pitch perfect. And, you know, it's like you said, it's hard to put social anxiety into words. And the way that this script is written and the way that the character does it is so well done. So yeah, this is a movie that definitely has lingered with me. And it's a movie that, you know, sometimes my wife doesn't really get my social anxiety or my introvertedness whenever we're in public situations. And so this is a movie that I show to her and say, this is how I feel. And this is why. And to be able to have a movie like that when you feel very similar to the main character in a movie is very important. So I think for me, that's why, one of the reasons why it's up so high. But on top of that, it's just a really well written and directed movie. Like Bo Burnham obviously poured a lot of himself into this film, and it shows. And everything that it gets come this award season is deserved, and I hope that it wins quite a bit tonight at the Golden Globes, and then it gets some nominations for the Academy Awards, because it's definitely, I know we differentiate between favorite and best, so if this was the best of 2018 for me, it'd be number 1, no questions asked. So obviously, definitely love this movie.
For sure.
Yeah. So my number 2 is, hang on. Okay, so yeah, okay, good. I'm sorry.
Did you forget?
No. I had to check something. But anyway, my number 2 is Won't You Be My Neighbor? And it's interesting because I never watched Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood as a kid. Like I just, it wasn't something that I watched ever. But seeing this movie, a lot of what you guys have said, it's a beacon of just good, at a time where, you know, culturally and politically, the country, like this nation, is just really divided and vitriolic. I would say, like, very like it's a negative time to be in America right now. But Won't You Be My Neighbor is this just, I described it on Obsessive Viewer that when watching this movie and coming out of the theater, like afterwards, I felt like I had just spent, like, it was like an hour and a half, 2 hour, like, reprieve from the world that we're in now. 'Cause it's so just good. And it does such a great job of showing what made Fred Rogers an incredible person and an incredible personality. And, one thing that I said on Obsessive Viewer is that I feel like Fred Rogers is like the closest that we've ever had to like an actual, like, literal superhero, like, in the real world, because he had this gift to take complex like information and hard, like, facts about the world and dispel it into easily understandable and compassionate, like, ways to tell it to kids. And it's like, that's a service that he provided to generations of kids that were otherwise would have not been able to articulate that and or understand that. And it's a gift that he had that I don't see being I don't see another person having like that level of compassion and just good as he did, and which is kind of a sad statement, but it's still also a feather in the cap of Fred Rogers that he had that personality and that ability. And the final thing I'll say about that is that ever since seeing this documentary, I've been kind of wondering, like, I never watched Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood as a kid, and I just wonder, like, this movie left me wondering, like, how different of a person would I be? Because, like you guys, I'm just a giant shitbag. Like, how, like, if I had watched Mr. Rogers, like, how would that have shaped who I would have eventually become? Like, how different would I have been if I would have watched Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood? And that's something that I've never really had that kind of experience or that kind of thought experiment at all, really. It's a really remarkable, like, good documentary that is just so good at its heart. And that's my number 2.
Well, we've already kind of touched on this movie a little bit, so all I'll add is the fact that obviously out of the three of us, you're the better person. So obviously watching Mr. Robert's Neighborhood obviously didn't help either one of us, because it probably had a worse effect, I guess, on us.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah.
Maybe you would have been less pretentious, though.
I know, right, yeah. Well, also just, I can't wait to talk about my number 1, which is this French movie that, it's completely, like, under the radar and everything. But I'm joking.
Is it a French movie that's in black and white, but it's, like, silent with French subtitles?
Exactly, yes. Yes.
God damn it. So I guess it's my number 2 because it's still, or Tyler already did his. So.
Right.
I knew as soon as you leapfrogged him, you were going to fuck me up with the order. But
it's
so
not
my
rocket
number
science,
2,
man.
You would think after like 5 or 6 years, I can't even remember how many times we've done this episode, but you would think that I would have gotten a better system, but I haven't. Anyways, my number 2 is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Nice.
So again, I kind of went back and forth between 8th grade and this movie as far as what was going to be my number 2 and what was going to be my number 3. And ultimately, I'm just such a huge Spider-Man fan, and this is just not just a love letter to Spider-Man as a character, but also a love letter to comic books. So we've talked about this when we reviewed it, when we had that episode on the podcast, but I'm sure I've said this before. We review a lot of what you would call, quote unquote, comic book movies, but those movies are basically just movies about comic book characters. This movie feels like an actual comic book movie, like a comic book come to life, the way that they did the animation in this movie. And I just love it. Like, it's not only a love letter to Spider-Man as a character, because there are so many different Spider-Mans in this movie. So there's a Spider-Man for every single generation and every single person. But just the fact that it's a love letter to comic books in general just hit me on all levels. And it's a movie that, again, harping back to what Tyler said, it's a movie that I will definitely be watching and re-watching for years to come, because it's a movie that I think if I ever have kids, it's a movie that I'm definitely going to be excited to show my kids.
Nice. Great. Yeah, I wish I would have seen Spider-Verse again. Like, I had debated whether or not I wanted to see it after work on Friday just to see it again, but ultimately I didn't see it. But I feel like if I did, it probably would have been higher than an honorable mention for me, because it's such a unique movie. I loved it.
So
awesome.
I'm gonna leapfrog Matt again. Sorry, Matt, because this
I feel
is
like you need to apologize to me, because you're gonna fuck me all up.
All right, sorry, Pat. So this is my number 1.
Nice.
Whenever we reviewed this movie a couple weeks ago, I didn't know if it'd make number 1 or not for me. I had 8th grade slotted in that spot for the longest time, but I think similar to Pat, I'm going to watch 8th grade for years and years to come, but I'll probably watch Into the Spider-Verse for much longer because of how great this movie is. And as a nerd that loves comic books and loves the character of Spider-Man, very similar to what Pat said, this is a love letter to all of that. I mean, it's so funny. It's so witty. The dialogue's amazing. But then you also have the heart of this movie, which is Miles, which is a character that I'm not super familiar with because I didn't read Ultimate Spider-Man, but a character that I knew enough about and just fell in love with after seeing this movie. And then, of course, you still have, Peter and the other Spider-Man and Mary Jane and Aunt May and all of these characters we know, but we're able to really dive into this other character's story to see how he defines being a hero and what his journey is like and what his family is like through the lens of Spider-Man. which I think is really great. And, you know, on top of that, it just adds to 2018 being an amazing year for inclusivity in the superhero genre and getting, you know, a superhero that is half African American, half Hispanic. It just gives another role model for kids to look up to, which I think is really important. So, you know, the animation in this movie is amazing. I think whenever we reviewed it, I talked about it. It's like every time we review an animated movie, you know, I can't tell you the last time we said, oh, the animation sucked. Like, the technology is just so good that the animation never sucks. But what typically doesn't happen is something innovative. And the way that this movie is animated is extremely innovative because it looks like genuinely a comic book coming to life. So, you know, I think it's been pretty consistent in a lot of the movies that I've talked about, that you can see that the filmmakers really loved the genre or really cared about the story they were telling. And I don't think any movie does that more than Into the Spider-Verse. So for me, that is why it is number one.
Awesome, man.
Nice.
Well said. So, Matt, what is your number one?
All right. So my number one movie of 2018 is Holmes and Watson. It's just, I can't. I wanted to go longer with that bit, but I can't do it. No.
I literally did the exact same bit when we reviewed Mowgli, and I had the exact reaction that Tyler had. Like, I didn't buy it for literally a second.
Yeah. Okay. So my real number one is 8th grade. A lot of what you guys said, I had social anxiety, still have social anxiety, just insane amounts. Like, this movie just struck such a chord with me because, like, when I was in 8th grade, about to be in high school, like, I had those same experiences that were so just mortifying. There's a scene where she makes a phone call to a high schooler, and she's pacing back and forth as she's talking, and she's all kind of like out of breath and excited and everything, and she's just pacing back and forth. And like, that's me. Like, that's me anytime I've had to make a phone call, like, in my life, like as a teenager into my 20s, and probably even today, I still do that. Like, it's just a weird, like, it felt so authentic and genuine. But so I really identified with Kayla as a character, and I thought that characterization was beautifully done. And Elsie Fisher is insanely good in this movie. Like, I am so excited to see what her career is going to be going forward. There is one thing that you guys didn't mention, is there's one scene that I won't spoil, but it's so heartbreaking for a variety of reasons and terrifying for a variety of reasons. But it's depicted like it's her and another character, and this other character, like, again, kind of like the internal logic of these characters in the scene is so well realized, and it is so authentic to what that type of situation would be like for those characters, both of them. And it's so, like, it's heartbreaking. It's just absolutely heartbreaking. And the fallout of that, like, the next scene is she's coming home and she's not saying anything, and it's all silent, and you just hear like you just hear voiceover of her last, like, YouTube video that she makes. And it's just so, it's heartbreaking and horrifying and just so sad and real. And the movie is just, it's remarkable. I really loved it. And Bo Burnham is a freaking genius at, like, I can't believe that this was his first movie. And I keep thinking that, like, on one hand, I want to say that I can't wait to see what he does next, or what movie he makes next, or what have you. But on the other hand, it's like, I hope that he has more stories to tell like this. So it's not necessarily like I just want him to make more movies. It's just I want him to have more stories to tell in the film medium. And he's like, it's all around. This movie was remarkable, incredibly moving. And it's, as you guys have said, it's the type of movie that I'll see multiple times because it's so well done. Even though it's not in black and white and not in another language and not over 2 hours long, I still love it a lot. It's eighth grade. It's my number one movie of 2018.
For sure. Well deserved as well. Yeah, I mean, we've all talked about it. It's a fantastic movie, and we all related to it, being introverts as we all three are. So, and it's interesting that we all did what we ended up doing with just podcasting, which is all just talking, because we all struggled with social anxiety growing up. So since Tyler already leapfrogged you, Matt, I'm going to go ahead with my number one. And if our listeners have been keeping track, obviously I still haven't talked about Avengers Infinity War, so that is my number one. Everything that you two have already said about it, the fact that this, not only does this movie exist, but they were able to pull it off in such an amazing way. I shared this story, I think, when we reviewed this movie. I mean, I love Star Wars, but I don't know if I was... I mean, I was pretty excited when we went in to see Force Awakens, but, like, I literally, as my wife and I were walking into Infinity War, I literally jumped up and clicked my heels. Like, I literally did that because I was so excited to see this movie. And it's the culmination of something we've never seen before. We've never seen a movie universe pieced together the way that they have done this. I mean, we saw it so long in comic books, and to see it pulled off in a cinematic universe is just amazing. And for it to work as well as it does is just fucking awesome. Now, I will say that the fact that it ends, but it doesn't really have a real ending, does kind of bug me. It will always, once we eventually get Endgame, it will always kind of be grouped with Endgame. But the way that I always defend that is, I mean, Empire Strikes Back is the same way. And that's a lot of people's favorite Star Wars movie. So years from now, this might still be my favorite MCU movie, because it's has everything that we've waited so long to get. And like you said, Matt, we really haven't gotten much Thanos. He's been teased and teased. And what I really loved about this movie is immediately you get Thanos. Like, they don't play any more games with us anymore with Thanos. Like, we are finally getting it in Infinity War, and we're getting a lot of it, and we're getting it immediately. And we're getting everything that we want, Thanos v. Hulk, almost immediately as this movie starts. So I love that they didn't play around with Thanos, and just the way that they weave all these characters together is amazing. I know that Tyler talked about maybe like the original screenplay of this, or the original draft of this, had Luke Cage making an appearance. Now, that would have been a little bit cooler if they could have weaved in some of the Netflix MCU characters. That would have been really cool. But, I mean, that's such a tiny nitpick in a movie that I absolutely love. So, all in all, just an amazing movie. And again, I know I've said this a few times, just going back to what I've been harping on this entire episode with my top 5. This is a movie that not only 10 years from now, but this will be a movie that, again, I'm showing my kids years from now.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything you said.
All right. So we normally end each episode with a nerd favorite. But since we kind of skipped all of our segments leading up to this, we are going to do sort of a nerd favorite. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of what we did with the honorable mentions with we've just been talking about our favorite films of 2018. We're going to talk about our least favorite films of 2018. And we're just going to I'm going to let Matt talk about all of his, and then Tyler's going to talk about all of his, and then I'm going to talk about the few that I have as well. So, Matt, what were your least favorite films of 2018?
All right. So my worst of 2018, I have 6 worst movies. And they're not really in any particular order, but I'll start with Holmes and Watson. It was just as bad as everyone's saying. I gave it, I think, a 1 star on Letterboxd, and that's only because like there were a couple of bits that I actually got like a little bit of a chuckle out of. It almost sounded like I was going to say got a little bit of a chub on, but I got I got a little bit of a chuckle out of a couple bits. But for the most part, every single joke did not land for me. And there's the setting of the climax of the movie, like that leads to some kind of funny bits, but it's kind of like I kind of compare it to A Million Ways to Die in the West, how that movie, like, I didn't like that movie either, but it just felt like that movie was like, oh, Seth MacFarlane commenting on what it's like to be in the Old West from the perspective of someone who's like knowledgeable of the future, but not really in terms of the script. And that's kind of the same type of humor in Holmes and Watson. They make a lot of jokes about like the future, but kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing, like, oh, we're not supposed to know this. Yeah, it was just not good, terrible. Next one is Game Over Man, with the guys from Workaholics. I've never seen Workaholics. I've always kind of wanted to watch it, but after seeing Game Over Man, I don't really care to see any of it, because I just feel like their brand of humor is just not conducive to my kind of sense of humor and my comedic sensibility. So the movie is just, I don't remember hardly anything about it. It's basically Die Hard, stoner Die Hard. And it's silly and stupid. Then let's see. I'm kind of dancing around here. Welcome to Marwen. I was kind of looking forward to it just because it looked like whimsical and fun, and even though it was like clearly like Oscar bait, kind of overly sentimental kind of movie, I thought like, maybe it'll be a good palate cleanser for the end of the year. But it wasn't. It was so tone deaf to the character. Like, it's like there is a thriller movie in Welcome to Marwen. Like, this guy is super creepy. He becomes obsessed with his neighbor. After seeing her one day, he goes to the hobby shop he goes to and gets a doll that looks just like her so that he can put her in his little art installation. And this is before he even meets her and is introduced to her. And like the movie does like plays it as if he's as if it's just like this quirky like thing, and it's so cringy and awkward and kind of creepy that I couldn't reconcile that with the rest of the movie. It was garbage. Okay, how many have I done? Okay, a few more just real quick. The Grinch, I wanted to like it because it's The Grinch and it's a Christmas movie, and I was excited to see a Christmas movie in theaters. Fought so hard to stay awake during it because I was so uninvested, and the movie was just lifeless. If I didn't snore so loudly, I would have just taken a nap in the movie. That's how much I wasn't into the movie. And then the next one is Mortal Engines. I wasn't expecting to like it. I didn't like it. It was just kind of a teen steampunk post-apocalyptic kind of thing that didn't do anything for me. Also, I had just a really absurd theater experience with it, with these two women who, in a theater that had just me and one other person in it, they chose the seats that were right next to me.
They're the worst. Like, those people are worse than Hitler.
I hated them so much. And eventually, to their credit, like 10 minutes into the movie, they did move down to like the end of the row. But also, they were on their phones. They were talking. It was like they were at a bar and having conversations about their lives. Like, they had no sense of like self-awareness to know that they were in like a movie theater, and they kept leaving and coming back. And it was just like they probably watched 20% of the movie. And I'm just like sitting there like you fucking paid for a ticket. Like what are you doing? Yeah, they sucked. But the movie wasn't good, so it didn't really bother me that much. Finally, this is probably the number one worst movie of the year is Life Itself, with Oscar Isaac and Olivia Wilde and a bunch of people. This movie was written and directed by the guy who does or created and show runs This Is Us, which is a show that I've only seen a couple episodes of, and I don't really like it. But Life Itself kind of... It feels like it is the type, like it's trying so hard to be emotionally resonant to the audience and emotionally like trying to hook you into the emotions of the movie, but it is so hokey and so manipulative in the way it's doing it. It's not sincere at all. Like, it's not like 8th grade where you're invested in the characters and you're invested in what they're going through. Life itself is just like, you need to care about these characters because the script is telling you to care about these characters. And it's just so it sucked. It sucked so much, and I really, really disliked it. So those are my worst of 2018.
Yeah, man, there's a few on there that I haven't seen, and I'm just listening to you talk about it. I'm glad that I didn't see him. Like, Welcome to Marwin was a film that kind of looked interesting to me, and I really wanted to go see it and wanted to like it, and then the reviews started coming out, and I was like, okay, never mind.
So I'm glad you brought up Welcome to Marwin, because I saw this last weekend and had the same exact thoughts. Like, super fucking weird. It's super fucking creepy, and I wasn't sure who thought that was a good idea. Like, his whole thing with feet and with heels, like, they try to make this endearing quality about him and like make you feel sorry for him because that's why he got assaulted. But it's like, I don't know, man, super fucking creepy.
Yeah, like I don't have any problem with like people who like cross dress or anything like that. Like that's
Sure.
not what the problem is with that. The problem is that he's saying that like it's so creepy because he's like, when I wear heels, it's where how I know like I can feel a woman's essence, and it's like that's like serial killer stuff. Like that's like, what the fuck are you saying? And he refers to them as dames all the time. It's really weird.
And like nobody thinks that guy is charming. Like, I get it. Like, everybody feels sorry for him because he was assaulted, but the way that Leslie Mann's character just immediately warms up to him, nobody is doing that if he has like a little doll that's supposed to be you, and he's making them kiss and shit. It's just fucking weird, man.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's so freaking weird. We reviewed it on the Obsessive Viewer, and I was really proud of that review because I had my friend Kirsten on, and she like I was able to talk to her about like her as a woman, her experience and like her reaction to it. It was like it was a very good review. I highly recommend it. But I highly recommend listening to my own podcast. But yeah, and that oh god, that movie was just it was just kind of gross and unsettling in a weird way. Yeah. I'd rather watch the scene from Hereditary that had like a very big effect on me in terms of my psyche than watch Welcome to Marwin again.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So, Tyler, what were your least favorite films of 2018?
Okay, I'll do bottom 5 and I'll be quick. So I'll go from less terrible to most terrible. So Goosebumps 2, Haunted Halloween was garbage. So that first movie was so surprising, and then they completely shit all over it with the second one. It's just it was not well put together. No care was put into the script. It was just a check to cash, so not good. Next one is The Cloverfield Paradox. So I was so excited for that movie whenever the trailer released during the Super Bowl, and then it was like going to immediately be available after the Super Bowl was over. I thought that was brilliant, and then I quickly understood why they did that, and that's because the movie blows, and it was dumped on Netflix. So I'm glad that Netflix is kind of course correcting a little bit. I think last week we talked about how they tried to dump Holmes and Watson in Netflix, and Netflix turned them down, which is great because Netflix doesn't want to just be the people that have exclusive shitty movies. However, speaking of exclusive shitty movies, the next movie on here is Mowgli. So this movie should not exist. The CGI for this movie is awful. The story is awful. It has no right to have ever been made after the Jon Favreau Jungle Book movie from a few years ago. Next up is Life of the Party. I don't know. Melissa McCarthy picks really, really bad movies to do, and this is one of them. I think I laughed maybe once. It was just, I don't know. It was a very stereotypical Melissa McCarthy movie, and I do not mean that in a good way. And that kind of leads me into my least favorite movie of the year, which was The Happy Time Murders. So, if Life of the Party, I laughed once, Happy Time Murders, I did not laugh at all. That movie, I think we reviewed it actually, but it is garbage. It is not funny. It's like shitting on the Muppets in a way. And like, I get the idea behind it, like adult humor with puppets. You know, they did that in Forgetting Sarah Marshall in a way, and it was really good. But an entire movie like that was really, really fucking terrible. So that's my least favorite movie of the year.
So 3 of the movies that you talked about will also be on my, because I decided to include 5, and 3 of the movies that you talked about are also on mine. So I'll save that for mine here in a few seconds. But yeah, it's weird that we think alike so often, and even when we come to our year-end review episodes, a lot of our top 10 favorite movies are the same, and a lot of our least favorite movies are the same.
Yeah, I actually think we had the same top 3 movies, just in different order.
Yeah, for sure.
So what are your worst movies?
All right, so I'm not going to do them in any particular order because I'm not crazy like Tyler, and I didn't list all of my top 2018 movies. I forgot what the year was for a second there. So the first one that I'm going to bring up is the Happy Time Murders, and I think Matt kind of touched on this when he talked about Holmes and Watson. It felt like just listening to Matt, like that was one note, like one joke, like stretched through a whole movie. And I always talk about those types of movies, like they'd be great SNL skits because you could get like a 10-minute bit out of it and then you can move on to the next thing. But unfortunately, these are feature-length movies, and I felt like that with the Happy Time Murders. It was just like, oh, let's take Sesame Street or the Muppets and make them say like disgusting and really adult things, and that's going to be the whole movie. And that was very disappointing for me. And then the next movie I want to talk about is Truth or Dare, which I felt like somebody watched It Follows and wanted to make a shittier version of that movie. And it was just so boring and really terrible writing and really just terrible acting in that movie. So really, really forgettable. Like I would have, honestly, if I didn't tag Truth or Dare as worst of 2018, I would have fucking forgotten that it even existed. That's how boring and forgettable it was. Mm-hmm. And then Christmas Chronicles was another one. It's going to be a string of Netflix movies that I'm going to talk about here to close it out. And the Christmas Chronicles was just, I know Netflix wanted to have like a fun Christmas movie with Kurt Russell with having the really long beard and all that good stuff. And it was really fucking stupid. The elves just were, oh my god, the CGI in this movie was so bad. Like the reindeer and the elves, like it made it unwatchable for me. And I know you're supposed to just have fun and laugh at this movie, how much fun it was, but I just didn't enjoy 1 minute of this movie. And then of course Mowgli, Legend of the Jungle. I really wanted to like this movie because I love Andy Serkis so much, and he directed this movie. He also was in the movie as well, doing mocap for Baloo. It didn't work. Like Tyler said, like after Jungle Book came out a couple of years ago, like they should have just scrapped this movie altogether because I know that they wanted to kind of make a darker version of the Jungle Book, but it just didn't need to happen. And honestly, I didn't think it was really even that much darker. Like it just, I don't know. It didn't have songs in it, like it wasn't a musical. I guess if that makes it darker, then so be it, but it just wasn't very good. And then the worst movie I saw this year, the movie that I hated the most because I love this franchise so much and I had so much expectations going into that film, was The Cloverfield Paradox. I thought it was so cool the way they did it. They showed the first trailer on Super Bowl night, like during the game, and then they dropped it on Netflix that same night after the game. And I thought that was such a Cloverfield-esque thing to do. But it turns out the movie was so bad that they were just fucking dumping it. Like the Super Bowl thing was just an excuse for them to dump it. And I want to say late at night that a lot of people weren't going to see it immediately, and I feel like they were running away from critics, because if critics got their hand on this movie, they were going to just completely shit on it, as they did, rightfully so. And a lot of people weren't going to see it if they did a full theatrical release of this movie. So I had to put this as like the worst movie I saw this year, because I was excited for it, because I like the Cloverfield universe so much.
You know, it's funny, like, just real quick, I feel like a lot of people actually did watch it that night.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, well, I'm basing that solely on Letterboxd, because after the Super Bowl, I kind of like loaded up Letterboxd, and I saw like so many people had checked into it and everything. But yeah, it was just dumped on Netflix. And it's so weird. Like, if they were just gonna dump it on Netflix, why pay for an ad on the Super Bowl to, like? It feels like they didn't have faith in the movie, but they had the extra money to do a Super Bowl ad. Like, if the movie was good, if this was 10 Cloverfield Lane instead of the Cloverfield Paradox, and it was a Netflix movie and they did it that way, like, it would be like, that would have been incredible. But why squander this really kind of inventive release structure or release strategy and marketing structure on a shitty Cloverfield movie? I don't get it. But yeah, it was bad.
I just feel like they were dumping it, and they needed an excuse to dump it. And they were like, oh, well, this kind of go with the cool Cloverfield thing that's been going on for the last few years, where they do weird releases for these movies. And I felt like they were just like, oh, well, instead of just people accusing us of dumping this movie, they'll be like, oh, well, they released it like that because it's a Cloverfield movie, and it's the cool way to do it.
And there were rumors that Overlord was supposed to be a Cloverfield movie, and I feel like they said that no, it was never going to be a Cloverfield movie, but I feel like it was definitely going to be a Cloverfield movie, but they just realized the bad press and everything and the bad reaction to Cloverfield Paradox made them think like, nope, it's their own movie. It has nothing to do with Cloverfield. So hopefully that doesn't mean that they're not going to make any more Cloverfield movies, because I would like to see them continue what they have been doing, but yeah, Cloverfield Paradox was terrible.
For sure. All right, so that is it for our top 10 favorite movies of 2018. As always, it was a blast, Matt. I appreciate you coming on every year. Take a few hours of your busy schedule to come on and talk about movies with us. So I don't know if we did this earlier in the episode, and I apologize if we didn't, but where can everybody find you on the interwebs?
We definitely did not, but I forgive you. First of all, yeah, thanks again for having me. It's always a blast to come on and talk to you guys, especially with like this. This is such a big episode for any podcast, so I'm touched that I'm invited back every year. So I appreciate it. But yeah, you can find me on everywhere at Obsessive Viewer. That's Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and anywhere else you can find me. Find my podcast, the Obsessive Viewer Podcast, at obsessiveviewer.com. Anywhere else podcasts are found and everything. It's a movie and TV podcast that we used to do topics every week, but we're kind of focusing more now on just movie reviews every episode. And we've kind of undergone some changes, I guess. Like Mike, the aforementioned Mike in this podcast was he was a co-host every week, but then he had to leave a couple years ago. So now we have just me and my friend Tiny. We host the podcast, but we also have recurring co-hosts. Like Mike comes on as frequently as he can. I also have my friend Fecus and my friend Kirsten. So we have kind of this roster of rotating co-hosts. It's a lot of fun, and it's really good. So check it out at obsessiveviewer.com, and yeah, definitely follow me on Letterboxd, because I know you guys have talked up Letterboxd a lot on the podcast, and I love it. I adore that that website so much. So yeah, follow me on Letterboxd at Obsessive Viewer. I actually have a few lists that I am hoping to kind of have like little challenges to go through. Like I have a birth year challenge where I picked 32 movies from the year that I was born, 1986, that I'm going to watch. I also have I'm calling it 30 from 30. Not to be confused with the sports thingies for 30 for 30, but it's basically 30 movies that were released 30 years ago that I've never seen and I want to watch. So I'm doing some fun stuff on Letterboxd. Follow me at Obsessive Viewer. And yeah, thanks again, guys. This has been a blast.
Awesome. Thank you again, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Yeah, as always, it's always a good time. We've talked about this before on past episodes, but I always look forward to this episode because I love talking about movies, but it's also really fun because you come on and for the first couple of years, you were kind of our pseudo executive producer,
right?
Because I didn't know anything about podcasting at all. And anytime I ever had a problem editing or anything like that, I would always come to you. So it's always a cool thing now that I don't have to bug you about podcasting and what I'm doing because I've kind of figured most of it out. I wouldn't say I figured it all out. It's always kind of fun to catch up with you on these particular episodes. So if you haven't already, definitely subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcatcher you use. We're on it. Also check out our website, thenerdspodcast.com, which you can find out all of our content, including our YouTube channel, which of course I'd appreciate if you comment and subscribe. I'm going to start back up this week actually with our edited content and our streaming content. I was going to start last week, but as I said earlier in this episode, I was really, really sick the past week, so that I kind of had to push that back a week later than I wanted to, but definitely check that out on YouTube. Just search for The Nerds You're Looking For. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Those are both at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Google+, and you can also email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. For Patrick Kuhn.
Tyler Hunt.
And Matt Hurt.
Go for it, Matt.
Okay.
Every fucking year.
Every year.
Every
year, man.
Year.
You messed that up. We are the Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, nerds.
Bye, guys.
Bye.